Meanwhile, we are awaiting the White House press briefing. Tax reform is gaining traction on Capitol Hill. It will likely be a big point of discussion in that room in just a few moments. Let's go to Guy Benson, political editor of townhall.com and Fox News contributor, and Bernard Whitman, a former Bill Clinton pollster and CEO of Whitman Insight Strategies. Thanks to both of you for being here. Guy, I'll ask you first. What do you think is going to be the first question from reporters in that briefing room? What is the hot topic today?
First of all, Sandra, congrats on the new gig on America's Newsroom. I can't wait to watch next week.
Thank you, Guy.
So I'm not going to try to predict what journalists might ask, but I would not be surprised at all if it was about tax reform and whether or not the plan put forward will, in fact, disproportionately benefit the middle class, which is what the White House is saying, and maybe trying to tease out some more specifics, because what we have right now is a framework. I think it's a good framework. I like the messaging that I'm hearing. I think tax reform is essential, and we're off to a good start here from a conservative perspective. But there are some big policy questions that need to be answered and some holes that need to be filled by Congress. And maybe a question that I would ask is what type of direction the president would want to give the bill writers in the House and Senate on questions like the size of the tax credit. The child tax credit is one example that jumps to mind.
Speaking of the hole in the deficit, Nancy Pelosi has vocalized her criticism for this plan and the deficit. She says this: make no mistake, after Republicans' tax plan blows a multi-trillion-dollar hole in the deficit, they will sharpen their knives for Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and vital job-creating investments for middle-class families across America. Bernard, heavy criticism coming from Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer. You've been hearing it all day.
And well-deserved. This is a massive tax redistribution to the wealthy. This will disproportionately benefit not only the top 1%, but the top 0.2% of Americans. I mean, it's absolutely outrageous. If you actually look and see the gap between, not rich and poor, but the gap between rich and middle class in this country has grown 160% in the last 20 years. This is a fundamentally against what the Republicans and Donald Trump promised. They said two things when they set out to accomplish tax reform. One, they promised it would prioritize the middle class. Two, they promised it would be revenue neutral, meaning it wouldn't balloon the deficit. This falls incredibly badly on both counts.
I want to get Guy to react to that, though, because the president says, as we have heard him say on Fox News this morning, this plan is for the working people. This does target the middle class, Guy.
And it does. You know, Bernard, I hope that you get a big enough tax cut that you can buy yourself a new talking point, because I've heard this always from Democrats. Whenever you want to cut taxes, oh, it's for the rich. No, this is across-the-board tax relief and tax simplification, which benefits middle-class and working-class families. And, you know, when you talk about any tax cuts, yes, if you're going to cut taxes across the board, the top 1% of wage earners pay 40% of federal income taxes. The top 20% of wage earners the top 20% of wage earners pay 70% of all federal taxes. So, yes, they're going to get a break, but so are working-class families, so are middle-class families, so are small businesses, so are corporations that have lots of dollars parked overseas, and it's going to simplify the tax system, which we spend billions of dollars trying to comply with this behemoth
and those small businesses, Guy. Bernard, I want to get you back in here on that small business point. When you look at that corporate tax rate, what problem do you have with that? Small businesses, 2/3 of the U.S. economy. Lowering that corporate tax rate that has been such a burden for those small businesses from 35% to 20%.
I'm all in favor of lowering corporate tax an appropriate rate. But what I want to ask Guy is, what happened to the deficit hawks in the Republican Party? What happened to conservative economic principles? What happened to the idea that we have to cut our deficit? This is going to balloon the deficit. Even aggressive tax cutters believe the deficit's going to balloon by $1.5 trillion or $2 trillion. Evidently, that goes right out the window to try to achieve something that the Republicans have not been able to achieve thus far, and that is one legislative win.
Yeah, first of all, I do find it interesting that Democrats are all of a sudden interested in deficits and debt after Barack Obama almost doubled the national debt over 8 years all by himself.
Trump will do the same.
So, look, I've been critical of President Trump for saying certain things like Social Security and Medicare. These are giant. When we talk about a debt crisis, those are the programs that are driving the debt crisis. It is basic arithmetic. We have to reform those programs for younger people, not current seniors, not soon-to-be seniors, but later on, these things are going insolvent. That's what we have to do. And growing the economy through pro-growth tax cuts And reform, I think, is completely appropriate. But yes, we should have an eye to the deficit. It does matter.
And one point that Paul Ryan continues to sell, Bernard, is simplifying the tax code, shrinking down from 7 tax brackets to 3,
and
being able to do your taxes on a postcard.
Say goodbye to the deduction you have for your children. Say goodbye to likely the deduction you have for mortgage interest. It's probably going to go away. Or say goodbye to your Medicare
likely
when the
going to
deficit
come up in that White House press
explodes.
briefing room in just moments.
Wrong.
Thanks to both of you, Bernard and Guy.
Thank you.
All right, good debate.